In section 3.3, I'm going to talk about the Sephardic communities of Kavala and Komotini, which are less known, less tourist visits there. It's farther away, but of course they have an active Jewish community. Kavala was a little bigger. Komotini is farther away. It was smaller. Both of them are towns which developed because of the tobacco industry. In Komotini, but for every two Jews, there's three organizations. Komotini had everything. There are only 1,000 Jews there, and they had, if you look in the archives, many organizations, many movements, and hardly any Jews there, but they were very active. In Turkish, Komotini was called Gumuljina. It's a city in northeastern Greece in the region of Thrace. Jewish settlement is known there from the early 16th century, when, according to a population census, the Jewish community numbered 100 people or 25 heads of households. The first settlers came from Edirne and later Salonika. Edirne is in Turkey today. It's also a big Sephardic center. And the Jewish community, primarily Sephardic, existed until the Bulgarians deported the Jews in the city, to Treblinka in World War II in the Holocaust, where they all died. When Nathan of Aza, the follower of the false messiah Shabtai Tzvi, fled from Edirne and Ipsula, he found refuge in Komotini with the Sabbatians. He was driven out of the city by the opponents of Sabbatianism, who placed a cherem, an excommunication, against him. A synagogue immediately outside of the city walls existed from the 18th century. In 1786, the Jews were victims of an attack by a Turkish army rebel, and a small force were revolted. They attacked the walled city, locked themselves in, and forced the Jews who lived within the walls to collaborate with him and shoot at the army. They had to feed the captives and break the Sabbath. The Chacham Yaakov saved the community by bribery, and the Jewish women cared for the wounded insurgents. The Jews escaped prosecution from the authorities also by bribery, and on the 22nd of Elul, there was a commemoration day of which they did not work. In the 1860s, the Karaso, Abravanel, Nachmias, and Molcho families of Salonika settled in Komotini. In the 1880s, the Jews lived within the walls, and the gates were locked at night. According to legend, in 1888-1899, the Jews did not live in the city, but came daily as traders from Drama and elsewhere, and were only permitted to live inside the walls after the sick wife of a Turkish official could not find a Jewish merchant who sold natural medicines, and he allowed them to live there on condition they'd reside in the city permanently. 70 houses in the Turkish quarter were allocated to them, and they were given permission to build a city inside the walls. In 1807, the Jewish community numbered 200 families. By the early 20th century, there were 4 philanthropic associations, as well as the Chevra Kadisha for burial and the Bikur Cholim for the sick. Since Jews were not admitted to Greek Orthodox schools, a Jewish school was founded in 1889, but it closed down shortly afterward due to financial difficulties. A boys' school was established in 1899, and a separate girls' school was also founded. A co-educational school was founded in 1910, which received assistance from the Alliance Historique Universelle. In 1912, it had 246 students. The community was under Bulgarian rule from 1912 to 1922. A branch of the Bulgarian Association for Hebrew Language and Culture was established in the city. When Turkey ceded Thrace and Komotini became Greek, the Jews had to designate 3 buildings to house refugees. In 1928, the community numbered 1,159 people. New organizations included the Cercle Israelit, the Women's Volunteer Rofei Cholim, and the Zionist Achdut and Bnei Israel. In 1934, Mayor Dassa sat on the local municipal council. In November 1940, after the commencement of the Albanian campaign, the government sequestered the Jewish school. In April 1941, the Bulgarians annexed Thrace. In early 1942, Jewish youth were seized for forced labor. The Bulgarians ran a harsh and violent occupation. While some, 28, escaped, most of the Jews were arrested on the 4th of March 1943 and transported in 20 open train cars to the notorious Dupnitsa transit camp in Bulgaria, and then dispatched from Lom by boat via the Danube en route to Treblinka. The Jews from Komotini and Kavala on the Karageorgi boat were shot by the Bulgarians and the Germans, while 3 other boats, of which one held Komotini Jews, arrived in Vienna, and from there the Thracian Jews were sent to Treblinka, where they were gassed immediately upon arrival. The Bulgarians confiscated all the Jewish property and possessions. Only 18 Jews returned to the city, left with nothing. Most did not stay, left for Athens and the United States or Israel. The synagogue, which had been used as a stable during the war, was returned but served as a storage facility until 1980. In the early 1990s, the roof collapsed and the municipality tore down the structure in 1994. Here we have the photos of the city of Kavala and the port and the harbor. Okay, this picture is a remnant of the synagogue in Kavala. Here's an explanation about the synagogue. It's from the 19th century, and the building was next to the Jewish Community Center, and it was damaged during the Second World War. It was demolished after the Second World War. This is a memorial to the Jews of Kavala who perished in Treblinka. Kavala is in Macedonia. After the capture of Budapest by the Turks in 1526, Hungarian Jews were brought first to Sofia and in 1529 to Kavala. Eventually, both Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews settled there. Eventually, the Sephardi community influenced the Ashkenazim in terms of halakha, Jewish law, and they assimilated into the general Sephardic community. In the 16th century, there were 4 synagogues and a total of 500 Jews. In 1676, the Jews comprised a third of the general population. By 1740, the Jewish population dwindled to barely enough families for a minyan, a prayer quota of 10 people, 10 men. The city developed in the first half of the 19th century due to the presence of local relatives of Muhammad Ali, who was born in Kavala, and as Egypt's ruler, contributed greatly to local growth. In the mid-19th century, as the port developed, several Jewish families of affluence from Salonika moved to Kavala. In 1880, the Jewish community only numbered 24 families, half of them from Salonika and Saras. The city's synagogue, Beit El, was built in 1885. In the 19th century, the Jewish community was augmented by an influx of tobacco merchants. Some of them also were from Germany. A Jewish boys' school was founded in 1889 and in 1905 a Coed Alliance Universelle school was established. Blood libel accusations circulated against the local Jews in 1894, 1900, and even 1926 under Greek rule. In 1900, the local Jews community had 230 families, about 1,000 to 1,300 people. Half the Jews worked in the tobacco industry, and others were storekeepers. There were also poor Jews. In 1913, the population numbered 2,500. In 1923, 3,200, and only 2,200 in 1940. They already left, migrated to Athens, or dispersed around the world. Many Jews worked in the tobacco warehouses. As the Jewish community grew, so did Jewish poverty. And then they had their active societies, Ozer Dalim, Ezra Betzorot, Ahavat Re'im, and a soup kitchen called Melo Hape Lechem. In the First Balkan War, in November 1912, the Bulgarians captured the city. Several prominent Jews were arrested on suspicion of collaborating with the Turks. The Jews suffered like the rest of the population from neglect, and in the winter, 120 families received food and coal for heating from the chief rabbinate of Bulgaria and the Alliance Israelite in Paris, and donors from Hungarian Jewry. The Greeks took over the city in 1913 and brought relief to the residents. In 1916, the Bulgarians captured the city then, and then Greek rule returned in 1918, and there was the Alliance, and the Jews complained via the French government that Jews and Muslims were ordered by the Greeks to do forced labor to repair the war damages. And Jews had to do menial work like cleaning streets. In 1913, the local Zionist Or Zion Society was established. Judah Parachia edited its Judeo-Spanish newspaper Hatzionut. As early as 1921, there were accounts of the Greek government forcing Jews to work on the Sabbath, forcing them to take Sunday as the day of rest. In Kavala, as opposed to many other cities where Jews protested, many Jews opened their businesses, including the president of the Jewish community himself. The community suffered from the World Depression in the 30s. In 31, there were 200 unemployed tobacco workers. We'll just jump here. In 41, under Bulgarian occupation, the Jews were pressured to assist the Bulgarians against the Greeks, but resisted. In retaliation, the Bulgarians, guided by the Nazis, applied the racial laws in 1942. In 1942, hundreds of young Jews were sent to forced labor, and then in early 1943, another group of 42 was sent to Bulgaria. Because of that, they escaped deportation. In 48, the Jewish population numbered 42. In 67, there were 47 Jews living in Kavala. By the 21st century, the last 3 Jews remaining had passed away, and their children moved away, but the Jewish cemetery remains intact.